So, Bon Hernandez, Global Coordinator for Break Free from Plastic Movement. Welcome to Nat's Chats. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nat, for inviting me, and I'm really happy to be here.
I'm really, genuinely really excited to talk to you. I feel like this is a great opportunity to just dive into your experience and your mind. And City to Sea have been part of the Break Free from Plastic movement for, I think, about 3 years now.
Yes, Break Free from Plastic is now a little over 3 years old, correct? So you were one of our early members, uh, and which now currently stand at more than 8,000 globally, which includes both organizations and individuals, around 2,500 organizations, of which City to Sea is one of our active core members.
Isn't that incredible how that's just grown? And you're global coordinator, so you've got a big job on your hands. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you, where you are in the world, and what your role is for Break Free from Plastic?
Sure. So I'm currently in Manila. So also in the middle of a lockdown because of the pandemic. But I've been uh, uh, global coordinator for Breaking from Plastic since I think 2017. So almost 3 years now. And prior to that, I've been with Greenpeace as executive director for the Southeast Asian office and also development director for Greenpeace International. I've been an environmental activist for more than 25 years. Most of my professional life has really been spent running and doing global campaigns, regional and also regional national campaigns.
Amazing. God, that's
Mhm.
fantastic. That's quite unusual to have really kind of found your place in that movement and had a career really in that space. How do you, I'm just going off piste here, but how do you keep yourself sort of inspired and motivated when you've spent so long sort of facing such massive global crises, some of which we're seeing still getting worse?
There's many sources of inspiration, as you know, in our line of work, and well, in my work as an activist, I've collaborated with communities in resisting polluting facilities, for example, but also in advancing real solutions or implementing real solutions and alternatives to some of the problems that we face. And even when we talk about the issue of plastic pollution, there's a lot to be inspired about, right? Communities, institutions practicing zero waste approaches to the problem of waste in general, but also specific to curb the problem of plastic pollution. There's also a lot. I've seen cities rejecting, for example, incinerators or many of these false solutions that are being promoted, particularly in the global south. And that's very inspiring for a lot of people. And we've seen a spate of policy victories around the world. As of last count, more than 130 countries instituting bans or restrictions on single-use plastics. Isn't that is like, that signals to me a what do you call this, a sea change on the issue of plastic pollution. And I believe there are three kinds of victories that we aspire for in the work that we do. There's what we call the local victories, which are, of course, inspiring because they show that the community is responsible for its fate, that they're able to determine what they want and not always be the last to find out, right? If there's something being dumped on them or there's a polluting facility rising up in their neighborhood. There's the policy victories, which make for lasting change because at least the change is institutionalized, but not often implemented fairly or evenly. Right? But the more important victory that we always aspire for is really shifting the climate of opinion on many of these issues, shifting behaviors. So, and that also applies to the plastic pollution crisis. That I believe makes for the lasting change.
So those, just to recap those three areas. So the community wins, the legislative wins as well, and then
Yeah.
the sort of the behavior change, the public opinions, those sort
Yes,
of.
it's influencing culture, right? And how people, because that sends a strong signal to policy and decision makers as well about which things should no longer be accepted as normal, or which things should no longer be acceptable as we move forward, right?
And that's really at the nub of one of the questions you know, I was going to ask you is how sort of small changes and the behavior change, sometimes people can sort of criticize people in the plastic zero waste movement, saying, oh, you know, what good is switching to a bamboo toothbrush? But actually you're saying, you know, in your experience of actually having a view over the global landscape of plastic pollution, you're saying that those changes are actually impactful.
Yes, I think it's a false debate or a false dichotomy to say that, you know, you only campaign for what you would call individual level changes, as opposed to, let's say, systemic change. In Break Free from Plastic, as you know, because our approach to this crisis is holistic. We look at the problem from every stage of the plastic life cycle, plastic value chain, we call it. And so and we believe that, you know, the solution to this is systemic. That there needs to be less production of plastic. There needs to be a transition to a circular economy, and also there needs to be a shift in the discourse, a shift in the way people approach the issue of plastic use and also pollution. So um, so when you look at it, would individual actions help translate to that systemic change that we aspire for? I would say yes, to a degree, because, you know, individual actions, particularly if they're inspiring, they demonstrate that, you know, alternative pathways possible, could have a domino effect, and you cannot underestimate the power of the power of social influence, right? And this is something that we've heard psychologists talk about as well. You know, how positive actions of others actually influence many others, and that also sends a signal to policy and decision makers. Having said that, we have to be careful about reducing the issue of plastic pollution to an individual responsibility issue only, right? Because that is what the industry and what the fossil fuel industry and what corporations want, because it helps them evade their responsibility for the problem. To say that, you know, this is a problem of discipline or lack of discipline on the part of the consumer, or being responsible and not putting your garbage in the right bin. This is not about that, you know, because when it comes to plastics, and in particular throwaway, single-use, disposable packaging, this stuff is simply put, unmanageable, right? Even if you put them in the right receptacles, will only end up either in the dump site here in the global south, in a landfill, they're burned in an incinerator, or a waste-to-energy plant, which means a nightmare for the climate, but also toxic emissions for surrounding communities. So you're simply transferring the problem. I think going back to the point of uh, individual versus collective responsibility, we have to be able to strike a balance. And as environmental campaigners, we need to be able to agitate and organize for systemic change. At the same time, encourage individual positive changes in behavior.
Yeah, I think there was so much in that fantastic response that I'd love to unpick. And I think, you know, it's lovely to kind of to hear your reflection, that sort of holistic view of the family of really of like plastic campaigners, and I definitely see City to See it, that influencing the individual behavior change and changing the narrative and promoting refill and reuse. And then, you know, we work and collaborate with and support other organizations in that space that are focusing more on, say, the lobbying and the legislation. So it's exciting to hear that. I would love to unpick, you know, what you're talking about there about the sort of big plastic, the plastic industries putting the onus on sort of the end user of plastic, often where there isn't actually recycling infrastructure. Even in sort of the global north, we're exporting a lot of our plastic to the global south. Story of Plastic was a great film that came out this year in 2020, and you starred in it. And what I felt was great about the Story of Plastic was that it really did tell the story from plastics production right the way through to its disposal, which is what you were talking about then.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit more about? Let's start off with sort of the agenda of big plastic that you've been witnessing.
Yeah, so which is, I'd like to speak about one of our pillars. You know, it's a global movement. One of our strategic pillars is really to shift the narrative and dispel many of the myths that have been propagated or perpetuated by industry in order to justify increasing production of plastics. And as we know, uh, uh, the plastic industry is essentially also the fossil fuel industry, right? And fossil fuels, or the dependence on fossil fuels, has spawned both the plastic pollution crisis and the climate crisis. They're, you know, ugly twins of the same parent, um, if I may say so. Yeah, one of the myths that they've been propagating, for example, is this concept of, you know, recycling. That recycling has become some sort of like escape valve or justification for continuing just producing plastics. And to be quite frank about it, many of our friends, you know, colleagues in the environmental movement before have also fallen for that ruse being promoted by industry, you know, as if, you know, it's all about clean and green campaigns, cleaning up and, you know, making sure that the stuff doesn't end up in the oceans or in rivers or in nature. So long as we, you know, we collect them and we put them in a landfill, we'll all be fine, right? Or at least they tell us that they will be recycling them, especially with the chasing arrows.
Yeah.
And we know already now, based also on the work of our members in the movement, that this recycling thing is mostly greenwashing, right? There is, of course, effective recycling. We've seen that, and that also helps in terms of livelihood. And I'm not saying recycling is bad per se, but the way it's been promoted by industry is really a sham, right? And we know the figures. Less than 10% of all the plastics produced since the 1950s have actually been recycled. And when you talk about effective recycling, even less, you know, 2%, not even 5%. And the stuff that they're telling consumers that, you know, this is going to recycling is actually shipped to poorer communities, or at the global scale to developing countries in the global south. Environmental regulations are lax, or if they do exist, they're not implemented properly. And so we've seen communities here in Indonesia, in the Philippines, in Malaysia, in Vietnam, being transformed into dumping grounds for plastic waste generated from the industrialized countries, with consumers in that part of the world thinking, oh, we're doing the right thing because we're putting this in the right bin, right, the recycling bin, but that's actually being dumped the other side of the planet. So, so that's one of the myths, you know, that industry has wanted to propagate, and that is clearly linked or rooted in this concept of individual responsibility, right? That people need to be, as consumers, we need to be disciplined, and we need to be take care of where we put our waste, for example. That is, and even if we did that, the stuff is still not manageable. It's
Yeah.
just, we're just producing too much of it. It's leaking everywhere. And we're finding it in food, we're finding it in rain, we're finding it all over the place.
So what are you seeing, and like in the story of plastic firsthand, you were witnessing that. I mean, we've seen bits of that story is starting to become more understood. I think certainly in the UK we had a program, Hugh and Anita's War on Plastic, which was on the BBC, which showed our waste being exported to Malaysia and it being burned and sort of not even in proper incineration plants. So how are sort of marginalized communities and poorer communities around the world being affected by plastic pollution?
When you look at the disposal side of things, right? So plastics collected that are not really recycled. So the communities hosting the processing plants, whether there's a burning facility or they now call them waste to energy plants as a way to, give a positive spin on waste incineration. So that impacts poorer communities. So it's an injustice or an environmental justice issue.
Yeah.
And then you have other sectors like fisher folks, right, who already have to deal with the pollution that's confronting them whenever they go out fishing. As you saw in the story plastic, and I've witnessed this directly myself. More than 50% of the catch, is really plastic. So they have to sort through the plastic, and then it's quite surreal to see that, and especially after hearing other groups say that by 2050 there'll be more plastic in the oceans than fish. But actually, this is a reality for many fisher folks. At least here in Manila
Yeah.
Bay, where the fishermen I've been in touch with. And then there's, of course, the other marginalized sectors of society. Here, I don't know if you're familiar with sachets, because fast-moving consumer goods companies, they have aggressively marketed their products using this tiny single-use multi-layered unrecyclable pouches, right?
Yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of them, and one of the justifications for their proliferation is that they are pro-poor, because this is what the poor people can afford, right? So it's artificial, because it's an artificial argument, because the impacts of the pollution caused by sachets, and we've done waste and brand audits in many communities, and almost always, not, I can tell you, there's like a 25% residual fraction that cannot be recycled, that cannot be composted, and and these mostly are the sachets, those unrecyclable powders. They have no value. That's why nobody bothers to collect them. And meanwhile, who shoulders the management of this unmanageable waste stream? It's the taxpayers, the local governments, through the taxes paid by citizens. And by doing so, we are effectively taking away resources, valuable resources that should have gone to more important social services for the poor, like education, health, because it's being wasted on waste management, right? That has been passed on to us by companies who are benefiting from, pushing this type of throwaway packaging on society, in our societies.
And I know that makes a lot of us feel very angry, and at the injustice of it, that these sort of the big plastic polluters are still kind of getting away with that. What's Break Free from Plastic's role in supporting the changes and supporting legislation around that?
Yes, so so through our brand audits, we are able to identify the real drivers of the crisis, right? I was talking about dispelling the myths earlier. And one of the other myths is that, the source of the problem are the Asian countries or Asian citizens, for that matter, because of this study that was done 3 years ago. And industry just lapped that up and said, that's why these countries, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, China, you all need incinerators. You all need better waste management. That is the prescription coming from big plastic and coming from industry. Through our brand audits, we have exposed that it's not really the problem of local governments or the problem of citizens for that matter, but really these corporations. And therefore we need legislation, or we need policy that would reduce, if not eliminate, the use of this throwaway packaging, not to mention the other single-use plastics that are being deployed in the marketplace, right? The plastic bags, the straws. In fact, that's what we call the low-hanging fruits, and many governments have actually acted on those single-use plastics. The holy grail for us is really packaging, because that constitutes a big chunk of the plastic that is being produced today, and that's also anticipated to be produced until 2050.
Yeah.
So we've been using those brand audit results to try to lobby governments to really look at the packaging question and not just stop with single-use plastic bags or straws or cutlery.
Which is brilliant. And are you starting to see sort of responses on that side?
It's a work in progress, and I can tell you, of course, they will not. We expect serious opposition, and we've already seen a lot of lobbying, at least here. I speak here for the Philippines, where there's several proposals in place to institute a comprehensive policy on single-use plastics, which includes packaging and an EP, extended producer responsibility provisions, and the battle is already engaged, and we've seen industry lobbyists also trying to influence our politicians to go the other way. So at the same time, there's aggressive promotion of waste to energy as a solution. There's aggressive promotion of other false solutions like chemical recycling to this problem. So that's it's a narrative and policy battle.
Yeah. And ultimately, the waste to energy plants is still dependent on fossil fuels, because we're still burning plastic there, which is still fossil fuels. So it's just more of the same.
More of the same, and the sad part of it is they're promoting, or the proponents are saying this is renewable energy, which is it's crazy, right? Because you're burning fossil fuels, and like we said, the carbon emissions would be unthinkable, especially if all plastics were burned in these facilities.
So the $1 million question, or $1 billion question probably, how can people who are feeling overwhelmed and frustrated by the dominance and power of the plastics industry, what can we do that would really have an impact? And potentially that can be supporting particular organizations within Break Free from Plastic, but where do you feel are the best places at the moment for us to use our passion and our energy?
I think first of all, we need to keep emphasizing the need for reduction, right? The solution to this crisis is not more recycling, especially not the kind of recycling, quote unquote, that being pushed by industry. It's really reduction. We need to stop producing plastics, full stop, right? And have a campaign for policies that would basically restrict the flow of new plastic or virgin plastic into the market, and at the same time calling for alternative delivery systems on the part of fast-moving consumer goods. That this is priority number one. They need to be investing in delivery models. We may want their products, but not their packaging. So, and this is something that we're seeing many communities and consumers calling for, right? And And the third would be really exposing the bankruptcy of this recycling argument, because that has given the justification for waste trade. It has given the justification for waste dumping, and we're continuing to see that despite agreements at the international level to restrict, to try to limit this trade of plastic waste from industrialized to developing countries.
Brilliant. Three really good points there, and really enlightening and practical as well. So you personally, what have you seen at the moment which has been giving you hope? Sort of which initiatives are you feeling positive about at the moment?
I'm seeing that more and more, at least for Asia Pacific, our focus has been to also implement zero waste models, but we've gone beyond the modeling stage, and we're seeing more and more cities in Philippines, in Indonesia, and Vietnam implementing zero waste solutions, and that's good. We need to mainstream this type of solutions as opposed to the linear model that is characterized by landfilling, incineration as the trajectory for our waste. So really investing in zero waste models that transition us towards circular economies. So that is the direction of travel that we need to go to or aspire for. Like I said, the number of policy changes that we've seen globally has been quite inspiring, and even in this part of the world, despite COVID, because COVID has also resulted in a spike in the use of disposable plastic masks and also PPEs, right? But despite that, you have cities like Jakarta recently pushing through with their ban on single-use plastic bags, and China even has also early in the year come up with a national policy also restricting single-use plastic. So these are good signs. We've hit a bump with COVID, and we know that industry and big plastic was also eager to capitalize on the crisis to justify, greater use of disposables. But we are also pushing back on that argument, and we know you've probably seen the statement coming from scientists and epidemiologists vouching for the safety of reusables, for example, over disposables.
We've been doing a lot of work on that at City to See, sort of running our contactless coffee campaign, showing how you can use your reusables and raising awareness around PPE. I mean, I've felt like it's a sort of, I felt like it's a setback, but that it's like, I've seen it as like the plastic industry in its death throes. It's kind of grasped for this sort of opportunity to win the public back over and to sort of get in our good books again. And they're going for that opportunity, aren't they? They're lobbying hard. But I feel optimistic. I feel like it's sort of that sort of death row behavior rather than them actually gaining traction.
And there's other positive signs. It's good you mentioned that, because it's not only coming from us activists, right, or environmental campaigners, but even financial analysts who are already saying, and insurance. The insurance industry has already put out a report saying the risks associated with single-use plastics are growing. Right, and it's not this reputational risks, and then the impacts to the environmental impacts and the human health risks. Once these things come out and become more definite or defined in the coming years, then it's like tobacco it's like the death knell for the industry.
Yeah. So really, we've got to keep up the amazing work that we're all doing, and keep amplifying those stories of positive change, because those are what are going to change the narrative. So how can people amplify the work that Break Free from Plastic are doing, and where can we find out more?
It's very easy, as you know, to join Break Free from Plastic. Just go to breakfreefromplastic.org, and there's if you want to sign up, be one of our members or supporters, you can do that, and you will be receiving updates about what our members are doing all over the world. Right. Our role as part of the coordination team is really to make connections between the work of our members, and try to focus our members' energies towards, achieving our strategic objectives. And we've been able to do that through our peak activities. Like we are now at the tail end of Plastic Free July, right? Which is,
Yep.
and you've seen we've had a lot of positive feedback, and of course lots of member-led activities that we've highlighted, we've amplified throughout the month. So by signing up to be a member of Break Free from Plastic, you'll be able to join the activities or join the organizations that are closest to you and be part of the movement.
Well, it really is a phenomenal organization to be part of, and I feel like it's really changed the efficacy of plastic campaigning organizations by giving us this umbrella organization that we can partner with, that we can find connections through, and we can find that sense of community and alliance. So thank you, from city to sea to Break Free from Plastic, and from me to you, thanks for the work that you do.
Thank you, Nat, and thank you to City to Sea as well for the fantastic work that you do for the rest of us. So we are grateful, and of course we'll win this together.
We are, and it's been really heartening to talk to you. I think that's why I was so excited to talk to you, because we can, as individuals, get kind of in our bubbles and focused on our day jobs. So it's just so nice to kind of zoom out with you and zoom in with you
Yes.
and get that perspective. So thank you so much, Bon.
Thank you, Nat. Same here.
And if anyone isn't already following Break Free from Plastic, then you can do that on Instagram, you can do that on Facebook, and of course you can just get in touch through the website as well. Okay, Bon, thanks a lot. You take care.
You too. Bye.